Let's go again.
As you wish.
We've finally reached the end of Squid Game Season 3, and while the finale wrapped things up, it didn't exactly hit the mark for everyone. Some viewers were left underwhelmed, saying the story lacked major twists or emotional weight, and others even called the ending one of the most predictable or awkward ones so far. Still, the arc of Gi-hun came to a close, and that felt like the writer's main goal this time around. But just because one character's story is over doesn't mean the games themselves are done. Far from it. If you've been paying attention to how the streaming industry works, then you already know. When a show becomes a breakout hit, studios waste no time turning it into a full-blown franchise. And Squid Game didn't just become a hit, it became a global phenomenon. It's still pulling in millions, not just from views, but from merch, brand deals, licensing, theme parks, and even a real-life reality competition. From a business standpoint, Squid Game is a goldmine, and it would be naive to think Netflix is just going to walk away from that. In fact, they're already working on what comes next, and not just another season, we're talking about the first international spin-off. The project currently known as Squid Game USA has been floating around online for a while now. Rumor has it none other than David Fincher is involved. Yeah, that Fincher, the mastermind behind Seven and Mindhunter. Supposedly, he's writing the script and might even direct a few episodes himself. As of now, there's been no official word from Fincher or Netflix, and chances are the whole thing is still deep in the development phase, probably in early concept stages. But the hints and even a full-on teaser for the American spin-off are already out there. At the end of Season 3, we see frontman In-ho in Los Angeles quietly witnessing a new recruitment in action. And what really grabbed everyone's attention? The recruiter is played by none other than Cate Blanchett. That alone speaks volumes. This moment actually ties back to what the VIPs have been saying since Season 1. They've always called the Korean version their favorite, but it's been clear from the start that similar games are taking place all over the world. In Season 3, one of the VIPs even casually drops a mention of Africa. All of this points to the obvious. Squid Game isn't just a show anymore, it's becoming a full-blown global franchise, and potentially one that could go on forever. The US seems to be the first real step in that global expansion, and if Squid Game USA actually lands with audiences, it's only a matter of time before we start seeing spin-offs set in other regions. Japan, Mexico, maybe even Brazil. The format makes it easy. Every culture has its own childhood games, its own playground rules. While the original leaned into Korean nostalgia, the American version could reinvent the concept using familiar US games like Simon Says, Dodgeball, musical chairs, and more. At the very least, that opens the door for a fresh visual style and a different cultural flavor. One big question still hangs in the air after that finale. If the story really is shifting to the US, how is that even going to work? Who's running the show now? Who becomes the new frontman? And will the American version stick to the classic format, with the same business cards, symbols, and rules? Or are we about to see something completely reimagined for a different culture? Netflix hasn't officially confirmed any of the details yet, but based on what we've seen so far, it's fair to make a few educated guesses. If the Squid Games exist globally, it only makes sense that each country would have its own operational cell, its own version of the organization, with regional rules, its own HQ, and local logistics. That means there's probably an American leadership team pulling the strings behind the scenes. As for who's under the mask this time, we don't know. But we do know that Cate Blanchett is involved, and she's already been shown acting as a recruiter. What's strange though, is that even in the US setting, the recruitment is still done through dakji, the Korean paper game we first saw back in Season 1. Two folded squares, one red and one blue, slapped against the ground. Same exact rules, same format. It raises a natural question: why is an American recruiter using a Korean game? There are two possible explanations. First, maybe there's a set of universal rules across all games, rituals that every country has to follow, things like the dakji challenge, the business card with the 3 shapes, the giant piggy bank hanging over the arena. All of that might be part of a shared protocol, some kind of global signature. Second, it could just be a nod to the original, a way to tie the spin-off back to the roots of the franchise and give longtime fans a little connection. Still, seeing dakji pop up in an American setting feels a little off. It clashes slightly with the atmosphere, and that probably means everything else will get reworked from top to bottom. The core structure will likely stay the same: a fixed number of players, masked guards with their triangle square circle hierarchy, a remote and isolated facility, but when it comes to the visual design, the tone, and especially the games themselves, that's where we'll see the biggest changes. The cultural gap between the US and South Korea is massive, and it wouldn't make sense to run the exact same challenges. So if there's one thing we can count on, it's that the games in USA version will be very, very different. If the original Squid Game was rooted in nostalgic Korean childhood games, then it only makes sense for the spin-off to bring in classic American ones. Some games like Red Light, Green Light are basically universal, so it'll probably stick around. Maybe the doll will look different, maybe the setting will change, but the concept itself, that's a keeper. The rest of the games, though, are likely to be brand new. There's so much room to play with here, literally. Picture a brutal, high-stakes version of The Floor is Lava, where contestants have to leap across unstable platforms suspended over a fiery pit or bottomless drop. Then there's Dodgeball, a staple in American school gyms. Only this time, one hit equals instant elimination. Carnival-style games could also be reimagined with a dark twist. Shooting galleries with deadly stakes, crane machines where failure means more than just losing a prize, popping balloons under pressure. Basically, a nightmare funhouse. The idea of turning the game arena into a twisted, decaying amusement park hits especially hard in the context of American culture, where consumerism and nostalgia have been industrialized. A deadly playground where childish wonder meets corporate horror, that fits Squid Game USA like a glove. So far, Cate Blanchett is the only confirmed cast member. Who else might join remains a mystery. Given the scope of the project, we can probably expect a flashier and more diverse cast, maybe even with a few A-listers thrown in. When the first wave of rumors hit that David Fincher was involved in developing the series, it didn't take long before Leonardo DiCaprio's name started flying around too. At first, it sounded completely wild, like classic internet overhype. But the buzz got so big that director Hwang Dong-hyuk actually had to address it. In a recent interview, Hwang said he doesn't have any concrete info about the US version, and that, as of the interview, even he was out of the loop on a lot of Netflix's decisions. He also mentioned that he only found out Cate Blanchett was on board at the very last minute. Her scene was shot under extreme secrecy on a closed set in a super short window, all to avoid leaks and spoilers. And yet, despite those precautions, the DiCaprio rumors made it to him. He admitted they kinda spooked him, not because they were wrong, but because of how fast the fan community picks up on even the tiniest clues. Was he subtly hinting that DiCaprio had been in talks at some point? Maybe. There's no confirmation either way, but the careful wording and nervous tone definitely leave room for speculation. Still, whether or not DiCaprio is involved isn't really the point. What matters is that people are already imagining A-list actors in this world. The hype is real. Fans have started casting their dream versions of the frontman. Names like Giancarlo Esposito, Cillian Murphy, and Mads Mikkelsen keep popping up. And while none of that is official, it shows just how big expectations are for this spin-off. But here's the thing, we still have no idea what the core concept of the US version will actually be. In the original, the recruiter was a man. In the American version, it's a woman. So who's to say the new frontman has to be anything like In-ho? Theoretically, it could be an entirely different type of character. Maybe a woman, maybe someone who doesn't even appear physically on the game floor at all. Netflix has already shown it's not afraid to take a more progressive route. And that's where some fans start to feel uneasy. There's a growing concern that Squid Game could lose its teeth, that instead of biting social critique, we'll get a hyper-inclusive checklist of trendy values. Remember, in Season 1, Hwang Dong-hyuk delivered a raw and biting commentary on capitalism, class inequality, and the way society devalues human life. It wasn't about political messaging, it was about the message, the desperation, the horror of being chewed up by a system that sees people as disposable. But in the hands of a global platform built for mass appeal, there's always the risk that meaning gets watered down, that the brutal core of the story gets polished into something more marketable. And while we don't know yet what direction the US spin-off will take, the original essence of Squid Game needs to stay intact. It has to be about people. Broken, cornered, desperate people. About how far someone's willing to go when they're crushed by debt, humiliation, or just the system itself. That's the soul of the show. That's what made it special. Will the American version stay true to that soul? Hard to say. We're living in a time when every major franchise is expected to carry a bit of social or political subtext. Gender, race, inequality. They get woven into the script whether or not the story calls for it. And yes, the cultural context in the US is different. We'll probably see a lot more about race and economic struggle through a distinctly American lens. That's fine. Those are real issues. But let's hope they don't eclipse what Squid Game is really about: human nature under extreme pressure. The US is a country where hundreds of thousands live on the streets, where people work 3 jobs and still can't get by. There's endless potential here for real, hard-hitting, character-driven storytelling. The question is whether Netflix will lean into that pain or play it safe and sand it down. And let's not forget, part of the reason Squid Game blew up in the first place is because it wasn't American. That Asian tone, the Korean aesthetic, it was fresh. It was something totally outside the Hollywood formula. Now imagine swapping that vibe out entirely for Western tropes. You can change the masks, the costumes, the games, the set design, but if you lose that atmosphere, that haunting minimalism, it starts to feel like just another deadly game show. And Hollywood's already packed with those. The Hunger Games, Maze Runner, Divergent, take your pick. Yes, the core hook, adults forced to play children's games, still hits hard, and it'll probably be enough to keep the spin-off from feeling like a total knockoff. But if this series wants to be more than just a polished replica, the creators will need to take a risk. Not by changing the rules, but by keeping the rawness, the irony, the cold realism. That's what needs to be adapted. Not just the visuals, but the pain. If they can translate that into the American setting, then Squid Game USA has a real shot at being something bold, something that matters. There's real hope that the creators will prioritize story over spectacle this time. Because let's be honest, if they just copy the original formula and slap an American cast on it, it's going to feel flat, predictable. And I have a strong feeling they know that better than anyone. This isn't just a popular title they're working with, it's a global cultural phenomenon. It means something. And that weight doesn't allow for a lazy remake. That's exactly why I think they're going to take a risk. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if they bring back Inho. Rewatch the season 3 finale. That scene where Inho spots the new recruiter in Los Angeles, there's something deliberately unfinished about it. His expression feels hollow. There's a quiet pause in his eyes, like he's processing something deeper. It immediately reminded me of that season 1 ending, when Gi-hun, with a plane ticket in hand, turns back at the last second. That same kind of emotional hesitation. It left me with the gut feeling that Inho's arc isn't over. What happens to him now? Does he just vanish into the background, fade into the shadows? It's hard to believe he's too central to the franchise at this point. My guess? He shows up in the spin-off, not as a player, but as someone still inside the organization, someone trying to quietly change the system from within. Gi-hun's death clearly shook him. It felt like the first crack in his armor. For the first time, he saw that not everyone is driven by greed, that maybe there's something left to salvage. And that flicker of hope could be what pushes him to do something different. Sure, it borders on melodrama, maybe even soap opera territory, but that doesn't mean it can't work. Inho has become the second face of Squid Game. His presence ties seasons together, and with Lee Byung-hun being fluent in English, it'd be incredibly easy to integrate him into the US version. The moment when Cate Blanchett's character nodded at him felt like confirmation. The recruiters and overseers from different countries all know each other. They're part of the same machine. What this whole project really needs is a strong script, a reason to exist beyond expanding a franchise. And if anyone can deliver on that promise, it's David Fincher. He's the perfect match for this world. Cold, psychological, precise. But only if the show has something new to say. If all we're getting is a remake with American faces and shinier visuals, then what's the point? That's why this next move is so important. Netflix seems fully invested. They're fast-tracking franchises left and right, and Squid Game is one of their crown jewels. The concept's already locked in. The money's going to pour in fast. And if everything goes according to schedule, we could realistically see American Squid Game by 2027. Now it's just a matter of what path the creators choose. Will they play it safe, or actually dare to do something bold?